When was the last time you felt bone-tired, yet pushed yourself to continue anyway? That heaviness in your limbs, the fog clouding your thoughts, the deep sigh that escapes without permission. Your body speaks a language of its own, and weariness is its most urgent message. You ignore it. You silence it with caffeine, with determination, with the in your head that whispers not yet, not now, after this deadline, after this project, after everyone else is taken care of. But what if that weariness isn't weakness? What if it's wisdom? The exhaustion you feel, physically, mentally, emotionally, carries a message you've been trained to dismiss. In the architecture of your psyche, weariness serves as an alarm system, not a character flaw. Carl Jung, one of history's most profound cartographers of the human mind, recognized that our conscious choices often operate against the wisdom of our deeper selves. The weariness you feel isn't just about sleep deprivation or physical exertion. It's your unconscious mind attempting communication. It's trying to warn you. Are you listening? Take a moment, right now. How does your body feel as you hear these words? Notice the sensations without judgment. The tightness in your shoulders, the shallow breath, the slight ache behind your eyes. Your body knows, but your mind, the educated, ambitious, socially conditioned mind, overrides these signals with remarkable efficiency. You've learned to be proud of this override, to celebrate it, to wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. Ask yourself, when did tiredness become your trophy? The psychological mechanism at work is both simple and profound. Jung called it the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied or buried beneath the surface of consciousness. For many, the need for rest, recovery, and limitation lives in this shadow realm. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This Jungian insight reveals why weariness feels so inescapable. When we refuse to acknowledge our natural limits, they manifest as seemingly external forces: illness, burnout, broken relationships. The shadow always finds expression. You feel it every morning when the alarm sounds and your first thought is escape. You feel it in the middle of conversations when your mind drifts away without permission. You feel it in the activities that once brought joy but now feel like obligations. These aren't failures of discipline, they're messages. What makes this recognition so challenging is our cultural context. We inhabit a world that venerates productivity above presence, achievement above awareness, doing above being. The psychological consequence is a mass denial of our human limitations. The most dangerous lies are the ones we've internalized so deeply we no longer recognize them as false. I'll rest when the work is done. Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now. Pushing through fatigue builds character. I should be able to handle this. Jung would identify these as collective projections, beliefs we've absorbed from our environment that we mistake for universal truths. These projections create a psychological double bind. We feel inadequate for experiencing natural limitations and simultaneously push ourselves beyond sustainable thresholds. The result: chronic weariness that feels both inescapable and somehow our own fault. This is where the unconscious mechanisms behind exhaustion reveal themselves. Your conscious mind sets goals, makes commitments, and drives forward. Meanwhile, your unconscious registers the accumulating cost, the depletion of resources, the erosion of resilience, the quiet desperation growing beneath the surface. When these two forces remain disconnected, psychological tension builds. You feel torn between what you think you should be able to do and what your deeper self knows is sustainable. You're not broken, you're divided. What would happen if you treated your weariness not as an obstacle to overcome, but as information to integrate? Jung emphasized that psychological health requires dialogue between conscious and unconscious aspects of self. Your weariness represents the unconscious mind's attempt to participate in this dialogue. It's speaking. Are you listening? Consider this possibility. Your exhaustion contains wisdom your conscious mind has been unable or unwilling to access. It knows something you need to learn. The shadow aspects of drive and ambition deserve particular attention. Many who suffer from chronic exhaustion possess remarkable capacities for focus, perseverance, and self-discipline. These strengths become shadow-corrupted when deployed without balance, without recognition of natural cycles of effort and recovery. Jung noted that everything good is costly, and the development of personality is one of the most costly of all things. This cost includes acknowledging limitations, a particularly difficult task for those who've built identities around capability, reliability, and strength. What parts of yourself have you disowned in service of these identities? The caretaker who can't receive care, the responsible one who can't relinquish control, the achiever who can't accept imperfection, the strong one who can't acknowledge vulnerability. Each of these patterns creates a specific relationship with weariness. For the caretaker, exhaustion becomes proof of love and value. If I'm not tired, I'm not doing enough for others. For the responsible one, weariness becomes collateral damage of duty. Someone has to hold things together regardless of the cost. For the achiever, fatigue becomes an adversary to conquer. Only weak people let tiredness stop them. For the strong one, exhaustion becomes a secret shame. No one can know how hard this is for me. Recognize yourself. These aren't random patterns but specific psychological adaptations, ways you've learned to navigate a world that rewards certain qualities while punishing others. Your weariness carries the message of these disowned parts. When you ignore physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion, you're not just pushing through temporary discomfort. You're actively rejecting aspects of your humanity that require integration for psychological wholeness. This is the heart of Jung's insight about the shadow. What we deny doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness of unconsciousness. It finds expression through symptoms we can't control. Weariness is such a symptom. The body remembers what the mind forgets. The unconscious preserves what consciousness rejects. Nothing truly disappears from the psyche. It simply changes form. Your exhaustion has transformed from a natural signal into a persistent condition because the message it carries remains unacknowledged. This acknowledgement requires courage, the courage to question deeply held beliefs about your worth, your role, your identity. Ask yourself, who would I be if I honored my limitations as faithfully as I honor my capabilities? This question touches the core fear beneath chronic weariness, the fear that without constant doing, proving, achieving, and caring for others, you might not matter. That rest must be earned rather than recognized as a biological and psychological necessity. Jung would identify this as a fundamental confusion between the ego, your conscious identity, and the self, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious. When ego needs drive decisions without input from the deeper self, psychological imbalance inevitably follows. Your weariness marks this imbalance. It's the psyche's attempt at correction. The unconscious mechanisms perpetuating exhaustion operate with remarkable consistency. Consider these common patterns. The more tired you become, the more you doubt your perception of reality. Am I really that exhausted, or just making excuses? As weariness increases, self-criticism intensifies. Other people handle more than this. What's wrong with me? The longer you ignore exhaustion, the more rigid your thinking becomes. Potential solutions narrow. Perspective diminishes. Chronic tiredness creates psychological isolation. No one understands how hard I'm trying. These mechanisms form a closed loop, each reinforcing the others. Breaking this cycle requires something beyond simple behavior change. It demands psychological insight, recognition of the unconscious patterns, maintaining your exhaustion. What if weariness isn't your enemy, but your ally? What if your exhaustion is trying to protect you from something worse than temporary discomfort? Jung believed that symptoms arise not to punish us, but to correct imbalances we failed to address consciously. In this frame, your weariness serves as a psychological immune response, an attempt to slow you down before more severe consequences manifest. The body speaks first in whispers, then in symptoms, finally, in illness. Where are you in this progression? Perhaps you're recognizing the early warning signs: irritability, forgetfulness, reduced enjoyment of previously pleasurable activities. Or maybe you've progressed to more persistent symptoms: insomnia despite exhaustion, anxiety, frequent illness, emotional volatility. Some reach the final stage: clinical burnout, depression, serious physical illness, collapse of meaning structures. At this level, the whisper has become a scream. The warning has become an emergency. Jung observed that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The recognition of your weariness, truly facing it rather than pushing through it, initiates an uncomfortable but necessary process of psychological growth. This growth begins with a simple but profound shift from viewing exhaustion as weakness to recognizing it as information. Can you imagine treating your fatigue with the same respect you'd give any other source of important data? Would you ignore your fuel gauge because you don't want to stop for gas? Would you disconnect a fire alarm because the noise interferes with your productivity? Yet this is precisely how many respond to weariness. The psychological resistance makes perfect sense. Acknowledging exhaustion means confronting questions that challenge core beliefs. What if your worth isn't determined by your productivity? What if your needs matter as much as others' needs? What if limitations aren't character flaws, but natural boundaries to be respected? What if rest is as essential to achievement as effort? These questions threaten identities built around self-sufficiency, caregiving, achievement, and strength. No wonder the unconscious mind finds indirect expression through persistent fatigue rather than conscious recognition. Jung named this phenomenon compensation, the unconscious mind's attempt to balance what consciousness refuses to acknowledge. Your weariness compensates for conscious attitudes that deny natural limitations. Think of it as psychological physics. For every unacknowledged need, an equal and opposite symptom emerges. The drive to prove your worth through constant productivity creates the counterweight of exhaustion that makes productivity impossible. The commitment to caring for everyone except yourself generates fatigue that ultimately limits your capacity to care for anyone. The determination to maintain perfect control produces weariness that forces surrender. These compensatory patterns reveal a profound truth. The unconscious mind will accomplish through symptoms what consciousness refuses to address through awareness. Your weariness isn't random, it's purposeful. Understanding this purpose requires courage, the courage to question whether the goals driving your exhaustion actually align with your deeper values and needs. Ask yourself, if my weariness could speak, what would it say? What boundaries would it establish? What priorities would it question? What beliefs would it challenge? These questions initiate the dialogue between conscious and unconscious that Jung considered essential for psychological health. This dialogue doesn't erase weariness immediately, but it transforms your relationship with it. Rather than an enemy to vanquish, fatigue becomes a messenger to heed. Rather than weakness to overcome, exhaustion becomes wisdom to integrate. Rather than failure to hide, weariness becomes truth to honor. This transformation marks the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole by integrating conscious and unconscious aspects of self. Individuation doesn't promise the elimination of weariness. Life inherently involves effort, challenge, and periods of intensive energy expenditure. What changes through psychological integration is your relationship with these natural cycles. You move from fighting weariness to flowing with it, from denying limitations to working within them, from exhaustion as chronic condition to tiredness as valuable signal. The warning signs your body and mind have been sending deserve your attention. Not next week, not after the project, not when things calm down. Now, because these warnings will not stop. They will only escalate until you listen. The unconscious mind possesses remarkable persistence. It will communicate through increasingly disruptive symptoms until its message reaches consciousness. What begins as occasional tiredness becomes chronic fatigue. What starts as mild irritability becomes rage or depression. What appears as minor forgetfulness becomes inability to concentrate. These escalations aren't punishments. They're increasingly urgent attempts at communication from parts of yourself you've learned to ignore. The psychological danger lies not in experiencing weariness, but in misinterpreting it. When you view exhaustion solely as an obstacle to overcome, rather than information to integrate, you perpetuate the very division within yourself that creates suffering. Jung recognized that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. The legitimate suffering in this context involves facing uncomfortable truths, that you have limits, that you've been ignoring important needs, that your current path may be misaligned with your deeper self. Acknowledging these truths hurts. It challenges identities, disrupts patterns, and requires letting go of certain beliefs about who you are and what makes you valuable. Yet this acknowledgement also opens the door to authentic healing, not just the temporary relief of a vacation or brief reduction in responsibilities, but fundamental reorientation of your relationship with yourself. The shadow aspects of drive and ambition don't disappear through this process. Instead, they find more conscious, intentional expression. The strength that once drove you to exhaustion becomes the strength to establish boundaries. The care you extended to everyone except yourself expands to include your own needs. The high standards you applied without mercy become tempered with compassion. Jung noted that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your weariness marks this darkness, not as something evil or wrong, but as aspects of experience you've been trained to deny or devalue. Making this darkness conscious doesn't happen through intellectual understanding alone. It requires felt recognition, experiential knowledge that registers in body, emotion, and mind. Notice how your body responds as you consider these possibilities. Does something release? Does resistance arise? These sensations offer valuable information about where psychological work remains. The recognition of weariness as warning represents the first essential step toward integration. This recognition doesn't guarantee immediate relief, but it changes the meaning of your exhaustion. What was once punishment becomes guidance. What felt like weakness becomes wisdom. Your weariness has been trying to tell you something important. Are you ready to listen? Are you ready to listen? This question demands more than a passing moment of consideration. It asks whether you're prepared to hear what your weariness has been trying to tell you, not just intellectually understand it, but truly receive its message within the depths of your being. What would change if you began treating your exhaustion as a teacher rather than an enemy? Carl Jung observed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet this becoming requires something many find nearly impossible: complete honesty with oneself. Honesty about limitations, honesty about needs, Honesty about the gap between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are. Your weariness marks this gap. The path toward integration begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. Rather than viewing exhaustion as failure, what if you recognized it as an essential messenger from your deeper self? Jung's concept of the unconscious provides a framework for understanding this messenger. The unconscious isn't just a storage depot for repressed memories or unwanted impulses. It's an active, intelligent aspect of your psyche that consistently works toward wholeness, even when consciousness resists this movement. When Jung wrote that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart, he pointed to this essential truth. Psychological clarity requires turning inward with genuine curiosity rather than predetermined judgment. What parts of yourself have you refused to see? The patterns driving chronic weariness often trace back to early experiences where you learned that certain aspects of humanity were unacceptable. Perhaps vulnerability was met with rejection. Perhaps needs were treated as burdens. Perhaps rest was portrayed as laziness. These formative experiences create what Jung called complexes, emotionally charged clusters of thoughts and feelings that generate automatic responses. Your relationship with exhaustion likely reflects such complexes at work. Notice what happens when you contemplate reducing your commitments, lowering your standards, or prioritizing rest. Does anxiety arise? Guilt, a sense of impending catastrophe? These emotional responses reveal complexes operating beneath conscious awareness. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Jung noted, this insight applies powerfully to the phenomenon of projection, the unconscious mechanism where we attribute to others qualities we've denied in ourselves. Consider how you respond to others' weariness compared to your own. When a friend, colleague, or family member expresses exhaustion, what advice do you offer? What compassion do you extend? What understanding do you provide? Now compare this to your self-talk when experiencing identical symptoms. The disparity reveals projection at work. You likely find it easier to recognize legitimate needs for rest, recovery, and limitation in others precisely because you've rejected these needs in yourself. What you can't accept internally, you project externally. This projection creates a peculiar psychological blind spot. You can clearly see when others push themselves too hard, take on too much, or ignore warning signs of burnout. Yet you remain convinced that your exhaustion stems from personal inadequacy rather than natural human limitations. Knowledge of the unconscious, Jung wrote, gives consciousness a new meaning and a new responsibility. Recognizing projection doesn't immediately transform your relationship with weariness, but it offers a crucial perspective shift. The qualities you admire in others who honor their limitations, wisdom, self-respect, authenticity, become possibilities for yourself rather than exceptions that don't apply to you. This recognition initiates what Jung called the individuation process, the psychological journey toward becoming more completely yourself through integration of conscious and unconscious elements. Individuation doesn't mean achieving some idealized state of perpetual energy or eliminating all experience of tiredness. Rather, it means developing a more honest, responsive relationship with your whole self, including its natural rhythms of exertion and recovery. The individuation process requires honoring your limitations, not as defects to overcome, but as boundaries to respect. These boundaries aren't static, they shift with circumstances, resources, and life stages. What remains constant is their reality and the wisdom of acknowledging them. Ask yourself, what if my limitations aren't problems to solve, but parameters to work within? This question challenges a core assumption driving chronic exhaustion that limitations represent failures of will, discipline, or capability, rather than natural aspects of human existence. Jung emphasized that psychological health involves acceptance of the whole self, not just the parts that align with conscious ideals or social expectations. Your weariness embodies aspects of self you've been trained to reject: the need for rest, the reality of finite energy, the truth of vulnerability. Integrating these aspects doesn't mean surrendering ambition or abandoning responsibility. It means including your humanity in the equation of how you live. This integration encounters powerful resistance, both internal and external. You've likely received consistent messaging that tiredness indicates weakness, that needs represent burdens, that limitations reflect character flaws rather than universal human experiences. These messages form what Jung called the persona, the social mask we develop to meet external expectations and gain approval. For many suffering from chronic weariness, the persona includes attributes like always reliable, endlessly strong, perpetually available, or never affected by pressure. While the persona serves important social functions, problems arise when you confuse it with your whole self. Jung observed that the persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. Your exhaustion reveals the cost of maintaining a persona disconnected from your deeper reality. The energy required to uphold this mask, to appear untired when depleted, unaffected when overwhelmed, unlimited when approaching breaking points, contributes directly to chronic weariness. Integration requires examining which aspects of your persona have become rigid demands rather than flexible social tools. Which masks have you forgotten are masks? Which roles have transformed from choices into compulsions? Jung noted that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Your weariness represents this fate, the external manifestation of internal division between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are. Making this division conscious begins a healing process, not instant transformation, but genuine movement toward psychological wholeness. This movement often activates what Jung called archetypes, universal patterns and symbols embedded in the collective unconscious that shape individual experience. Several archetypes powerfully influence your relationship with weariness. The perfectionist archetype demands flawless performance regardless of circumstance. It sets impossible standards and punishes perceived failure with relentless self-criticism. When active, this archetype transforms natural tiredness into evidence of inadequacy. The caretaker archetype places others' needs above all personal considerations. It finds identity and purpose in serving, supporting, and sustaining others. When dominant, this archetype interprets self-care as selfishness and frames exhaustion as necessary sacrifice. The hero archetype orients toward achievement, conquest, and overcoming obstacles through sheer force of will. It draws meaning from surmounting challenges others find impossible. When unbalanced, this archetype views limitations as enemies rather than realities, and rest as surrender rather than necessity. The martyr archetype finds validation through suffering. It converts pain into purpose and sacrifice into virtue. When controlling your relationship with weariness, this archetype transforms exhaustion into proof of commitment and dedication. Recognizing these archetypal influences doesn't mean they control you. Rather, awareness creates choice. You can consciously relate to these powerful patterns rather than being unconsciously driven by them. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Jung reminded us The archetypes driving your exhaustion aren't destiny. They're psychological patterns subject to integration through awareness. This integration requires psychological courage, the willingness to question foundational beliefs about your worth, purpose, and identity. Consider these essential questions. If you weren't the responsible one, who would you be? If you allowed yourself to need as much as you allow others to need, what would change? If you respected your limitations as boundaries rather than battling them as obstacles, what possibilities might emerge? If your worth didn't depend on productivity, achievement, or service to others, how would you measure your value? These questions disrupt the unconscious patterns, maintaining chronic weariness. They create space between automatic responses and conscious choices. They initiate dialogue between the persona you present to the world and the deeper self, sending warnings through exhaustion. Jung emphasized that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This principle applies to the meeting between your conscious identity and the unconscious aspects of self expressed through weariness. Both are transformed through genuine encounter. The persona becomes more flexible, more authentic, more inclusive of human limitations. The unconscious becomes more available as resource rather than emerging only through symptoms. Psychological integration doesn't eliminate differences between conscious and unconscious aspects of self. Rather, it establishes communication between these dimensions. Your weariness begins this communication. Your willingness to listen continues it. The process resembles what Jung called active imagination, a dialogue with unconscious content that treats it as meaningful rather than random. Try this approach with your exhaustion. When weariness appears, rather than immediately fighting it or collapsed into it, get curious. Ask it directly. What are you trying to tell me? What do you need? What have I been ignoring that you're bringing to my attention? Then listen, not for what you expect to hear, but for what actually emerges. This listening often reveals surprising wisdom. Perhaps your exhaustion will speak of boundaries long ignored. Perhaps it will reveal values compromised in pursuit of external validation. Perhaps it will remind you of joys abandoned for obligations. Whatever emerges, treat it not as complaint, but as guidance. Not as weakness, but as intelligence. Not as obstacle, but as orientation. This approach initiates what Jung considered essential for psychological health: dialogue between conscious and unconscious aspects of self. Rather than consciousness dictating all terms while the unconscious communicates through symptoms, both participate in determining how you live. Jung observed that the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. Integrating the message of your weariness isn't primarily intellectual, it's creative, a reshaping of your relationship with yourself that emerges through experimentation, play, and genuine curiosity. What new patterns might emerge if you treated your energy as precious resource rather than infinite supply? What possibilities might open if you respected cycles of effort and recovery rather than demanding constant output? What quality might enter your work, relationships, and presence if you valued restoration as highly as production? These questions invite creative engagement with your weariness. Rather than seeing exhaustion simply as problem to solve, you recognize it as gateway to more sustainable, authentic living. This recognition doesn't promise immediate relief. Integration takes time. Time to notice patterns, time to experiment with alternatives, time to develop new relationships with parts of yourself long ignored or rejected. Yet even before complete integration, shifts begin. Moments of choice emerge where once there seemed only compulsion. Spaces open between stimulus and response. New possibilities appear amid familiar patterns.
The metaphors Jung employed illuminate this process. He often spoke of psychological development as similar to alchemy, the medieval practice of transforming base metals into gold. In this frame, your weariness represents not weakness to eliminate but raw material to transform.
The first alchemical stage involves nigredo, blackness, darkness, prima materia, in its initial form. Your exhaustion in its raw state represents this stage, uncomfortable, unwanted, yet containing everything needed for transformation. The second stage, albedo, brings whitening purification that reveals the essence within the raw material. When you stop fighting your weariness and start listening to its message, you enter this stage. The signal clarifies. The wisdom within fatigue becomes more accessible. The final stage, rubedo, produces the philosophical gold, not literal metal but psychological wholeness. Integration reaches this stage when your relationship with weariness fundamentally transforms. Exhaustion remains a physical reality under certain conditions, but your psychological response changes completely. Rather than enemy, weariness becomes ally. Rather than failure, fatigue becomes information. Rather than weakness to hide, exhaustion becomes wisdom to honor. This transformation doesn't happen through willpower or intellectual understanding alone. It requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological capacity to hold opposing tensions long enough for something new to emerge. You hold the tension between drive and limitation, between ambition and sustainability, between doing and being, between service to others and fidelity to self. From these tensions, new possibilities emerge, not through conquest of one side by the other, but through genuine integration that honors the truth in both. Jung noted that the unconscious wants to flow into consciousness in order to reach the light, but at the same time, it continually thwarts itself because it would rather remain unconscious. This paradox explains why integration challenges us so deeply. Part of you genuinely wants to recognize what your weariness communicates. Another part prefers the familiar patterns driving exhaustion, even as they cause suffering. This inner division creates what Jung called the tension of opposites, psychological forces pulling in contrary directions. Your conscious mind values achievement, contribution, and meeting others' expectations. Your unconscious registers the accumulating cost and sends warnings through persistent fatigue. Integration doesn't eliminate this tension, rather, it creates capacity to navigate it consciously rather than being torn apart by it unconsciously. The psychological transcendent function arises from the union of conscious and unconscious contents, Jung wrote. This function develops through consistent practice, the practice of honoring both your aspirations and your limitations, both your commitments to others and your responsibility to yourself. Consider how this practice might transform your daily experience. Instead of pushing through fatigue automatically, you to assess what's truly needed. Instead of saying yes reflexively, you consider actual capacity rather than desired capacity. Instead of measuring yourself against impossible standards, you acknowledge the context and resources actually available. Instead of treating rest as reward for productivity, you recognize it as prerequisite for sustainable contribution. These shifts don't happen instantly or perfectly. Integration proceeds gradually, unevenly, with setbacks and recoveries. What matters isn't perfection but direction, movement toward greater wholeness rather than continuing fragmentation. There is no linear evolution, Jung reminded us. There is only a circumambulation of the self. This circumambulation, moving around something from different angles, seeing it from multiple perspectives, characterizes how you integrate the message of your weariness. Sometimes you'll view exhaustion from the perspective of limitation, what you genuinely cannot sustain. Sometimes you'll approach it from the angle of values, what matters enough to justify the energy it requires. Sometimes you'll examine it through the lens of authenticity, what alignment between inner reality and outer expression might reduce the drain of maintaining facades. Each perspective offers valuable insight. None alone captures the complete truth. Integration involves holding these multiple viewpoints simultaneously, allowing each to inform your choices without any single perspective dominating absolutely. This multiplicity challenges the either-or thinking that often characterizes our approach to weariness. Either I push through or I give up. Either I meet others' needs or I'm selfish. Either I achieve my goals or I'm a failure. Integration introduces the possibility of both, and both honoring commitments and respecting limitations, both contributing to others and caring for yourself, both pursuing meaningful achievement and acknowledging natural cycles of effort and recovery. Jung observed that the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. This play involves experimenting with new responses to fatigue, rather than automated reactions, either pushing through exhaustion or collapsing into it. You develop a repertoire of conscious choices. Sometimes appropriate response will indeed involve pushing through temporary tiredness to meet genuine necessity. Sometimes it will mean reducing commitments to create space for recovery. Sometimes it will require renegotiating expectations with others and with yourself. Sometimes it will demand deeper examination of whether current goals actually align with authentic values. Integration doesn't prescribe identical responses to all situations. Rather, it develops your capacity to discern what's genuinely needed based on the specific context, resources, and priorities present in each moment. This discernment grows through practice, not abstract contemplation, but actual experiments in relating differently to your weariness. Each choice to honor fatigue as messenger rather than enemy builds neural pathways supporting integration. Each decision to include your humanity in the equation of what's possible strengthens psychological wholeness. In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order, Jung wrote. The apparent chaos of chronic weariness contains hidden order, the psyche's attempt to establish balance where consciousness has created imbalance. Integration reveals this order, making conscious what was operating unconsciously. As this integration deepens, your relationship with weariness transforms fundamentally. Exhaustion doesn't disappear from human experience, but it changes from chronic condition to intermittent signal, from enemy to ally, from punishment to guidance. The psychological task isn't eliminating fatigue, but developing capacity to respond to it with awareness rather than automaticity. Not transcending humanity, but embodying it more completely, including its natural limitations, alongside its remarkable capabilities. Jung emphasized that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Your weariness represents one such contrary, the limited, vulnerable, finite aspect of self that requires acknowledgement alongside the capable, strong, expansive qualities consciousness more readily embraces. Integration doesn't promise permanent resolution of this tension. Human existence inherently involves navigating between opposing forces, effort and rest, giving and receiving, doing and being. What changes through integration is your capacity to navigate these tensions consciously, rather than being unconsciously driven by one side, while the other manifests through symptoms. This capacity develops through consistent practice, the practice of listening to your weariness with genuine curiosity rather than automatic rejection. Each time you hear what exhaustion might be trying to tell you, integration deepens.
Each moment you honor limitations alongside aspirations, psychological wholeness expands.
The path isn't linear, you'll forget. Revert to familiar patterns, find yourself once again pushing beyond sustainable thresholds. These aren't failures but opportunities to notice what triggers regression and choose differently next time. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung noted. The pain in this context involves facing uncomfortable truths, that you cannot do everything you or others might want, that your energy has actual limits, that certain patterns you've relied upon may no longer serve your wholeness. Yet this pain serves purpose. It clears space for more authentic living, life aligned with both your capabilities and your limitations, both your commitments to others and your responsibility to yourself. The integration of your weariness isn't complete until it transforms from theory to embodied reality, until the wisdom it offers shapes not just your thinking, but your actual choices about how to live. What would change if you truly received the message your exhaustion has been trying to deliver? What would change if you truly received the message your exhaustion has been trying to deliver? This question isn't theoretical, it's transformative. Your answer determines whether weariness remains a chronic condition or becomes a catalyst for profound change. Transformation begins with a radical reframing. Your exhaustion isn't weakness, but wisdom. Not failure, but foresight. Not deficiency, but guidance. Carl Jung observed that the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. Consider these practical steps toward transformation. Begin treating your energy as finite treasure rather than infinite resource. Each day brings specific capacity, not limitless potential. What deserves this precious energy? What doesn't? These questions initiate necessary discernment between essential and optional demands. Notice where should drives decisions. I should be able to handle this. I should always be available. I should never need help. These statements reveal internalized expectations disconnected from human reality. Replace should with could. What could you realistically manage given actual resources and limitations? Experiment with small boundaries. Decline one optional commitment. Delay one non-urgent response. Reduce one self-imposed standard. These experiments create data about what happens when you honor limitations, often revealing that catastrophic expectations fail to materialize. Practice conscious transitions between activities. Rather than rushing from one demand to another, create brief moments to assess energy levels, reset attention, and consciously choose what comes next. These transitions interrupt autopilot patterns that ignore mounting fatigue. Schedule recovery with the same commitment given to productivity. Rest isn't what happens in the margins of an overfilled schedule, but essential activity deserving intentional time. What forms of restoration most effectively replenish your specific depletion? These become non-negotiable elements of sustainable living. These practices initiate what Jung called individuation, becoming more completely yourself through integration of conscious and unconscious elements. This integration doesn't promise perpetual ease, but offers something more valuable, authentic living aligned with both aspirations and limitations. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Jung wrote, "Your weariness marks the gap between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are." Transformation closes this gap not through superhuman transcendence of limitations, but through honest acknowledgement of your full humanity. This acknowledgement liberates energy previously consumed by maintaining facades, denying needs, and battling natural limitations. When you stop fighting reality, including the reality of finite energy, you discover resources for what truly matters. The rhythm of effort and rest in psychological health mirrors natural cycles observed throughout creation. day and night, seasons of growth and dormancy, systole and diastole, inhalation and exhalation. None represents weakness or failure. Each constitutes essential aspects of sustainable functioning. Your weariness simply signals which cycle currently requires emphasis. When you've operated too long in perpetual daytime mode, constant activity without adequate recovery, exhaustion reminds you that night serves essential function, not as absence of productivity, but as presence of different yet equally necessary processes. Jung noted that the gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus. This insight reveals how archetypes denied conscious expression manifest through bodily symptoms. Your exhaustion represents the reality principle demanding acknowledgement after consciousness has denied its existence too long. Liberation comes through conscious relationship with these psychological forces rather than unconscious subjugation to them. You achieve freedom not by escaping your humanity, but by embracing it more completely, including its inherent limitations alongside its remarkable capabilities. This embrace requires psychological flexibility, capacity to adapt responses based on changing internal and external conditions, rather than rigid adherence to fixed identity or expectations. Flexibility doesn't mean abandoning commitments or responsibilities, but approaching them with awareness of actual resources rather than idealized capacity. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, Jung observed. The patterns driving chronic exhaustion often serve precisely this purpose, keeping consciousness so occupied with external demands that deeper questions remain unexamined. Liberation requires facing these questions directly. What truly matters to you beyond external validation? What values would guide your choices if fear of judgment disappeared? What forms of contribution align with your authentic gifts rather than adopted shoulds? What rhythms of engagement and recovery would support sustainable thriving rather than momentary survival? These questions initiate the dialogue between conscious and unconscious that Jung considered essential for psychological health. This dialogue doesn't promise permanent resolution of all tensions, but develops capacity to navigate inherent human paradoxes with awareness rather than automatic reactivity. The paradox central to transforming your relationship with weariness involves simultaneous acknowledgement of both strength and vulnerability, capability and limitation, responsibility and need. Liberation comes not through resolving this paradox by choosing one side, but through transcending either or. Thinking entirely, you become both strong and vulnerable, both capable and limited, both responsible and needing. This integration embodies what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological capacity that arises from holding opposing tensions long enough for something new to emerge. Not elimination of polarity, but creative engagement with it. The transformation doesn't mean abandoning ambition, responsibility, or contribution. Rather, it means including your humanity in calculations about what's possible and sustainable. Not lower standards, but more realistic ones. Not less accomplishment, but more authentic achievement. Not diminished care for others, but care that includes yourself in the equation. About a third of my cases are suffering not from any clinically definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives, Jung wrote. This observation reveals another dimension of chronic weariness. Exhaustion sometimes masks existential questions about meaning and purpose. When activity lacks connection to authentic values, it depletes regardless of physical demand. Conversely, engagement aligned with genuine purpose energizes even when objectively challenging. The transformation of your relationship with weariness must address this existential dimension alongside psychological and physical aspects. Ask yourself, What activities replenish rather than deplete me, regardless of the energy they require? The answer reveals work that connects to authentic purpose rather than merely meeting external expectations or internal shoulds. This connection to meaning represents an essential element of sustainable living. Not all times will feel equally purposeful. Human experience inevitably includes periods of confusion, transition, and uncertainty. Yet overall alignment between activity and authentic values creates resilience amid these natural fluctuations. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being, Jung observed. This kindling requires energy, but not all forms of energy expenditure serve this purpose equally. Transformation involves discernment between activities that kindle light and those that merely consume fuel without illumination. The liberation emerging through this discernment creates profound shift in your experience of life. Not freedom from all limitation or challenge, but freedom to engage these realities consciously rather than being unconsciously driven by them. You become free not from tiredness, but from chronic exhaustion maintained by unconscious patterns. Free not from responsibility, but from compulsive over-responsibility, disconnected from actual capacity. Free not from effort, but from effort, disconnected from authentic purpose. Free not from giving, but from giving that excludes yourself from consideration. This freedom manifests through changed relationship with fundamental aspects of human experience. Time becomes ally rather than adversary, container for meaningful living that includes both productivity and restoration, both achievement and recovery. Others become fellow humans rather than sources of unlimited demands or opportunities to prove worth through endless giving. Achievement becomes expression of genuine values within natural limitations rather than validation of basic worth or protection against inner emptiness. Rest becomes biological and sociological necessity rather than indulgence to minimize or reward contingent on productivity. These transformations create what Jung called the decisive question for man: is he related to something infinite or not? This relationship to something beyond ego needs and social expectations provides context for navigating the inevitable tensions of human existence, including the tension between aspiration and limitation. Without this larger context, weariness becomes merely problem to solve rather than invitation to greater wholeness. The transformation we've explored involves recognizing exhaustion as gateway to more authentic living rather than obstacle to overcome through sheer force of will. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases, Jung reminded us. Your path toward liberating yourself from chronic weariness will differ from others based on specific patterns, beliefs, and circumstances. What remains universal is the necessity of bringing consciousness to what has operated unconsciously. The specific manifestation of your exhaustion, when it appears, what triggers its intensification, which thoughts accompany it, provides valuable information about your particular path. These details reveal the unconscious patterns requiring integration for your specific healing. This integration proceeds not through abstract understanding alone, but through lived experimentation, trying new responses to fatigue, establishing different boundaries, questioning long-held beliefs about what makes you valuable. Each experiment creates data about what supports sustainable living in your unique situation. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances, Jung wrote. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This principle applies to the meeting between your conscious identity and the unconscious aspects of self expressed through weariness. Both transform through genuine encounter. The conscious personality becomes more flexible, more inclusive of natural cycles, more accepting of human limitation. The unconscious material becomes more available, as resource rather than emerging primarily through symptoms. This mutual transformation characterizes genuine liberation, not escaping your humanity but embodying it more completely, not transcending limitation but including it consciously in how you live. The conclusion of this exploration brings us full circle to where we began. Your weariness represents warning you've been trained to ignore. The transformation we've examined involves recognizing this warning not as obstacle but as opportunity, invitation to greater wholeness through honest acknowledgement of your full humanity. I am not what happened to me, Jung wrote. I am what I choose to become. Your exhaustion has happened to you, partly through circumstances beyond control, partly through unconscious patterns, partly through internalized beliefs about what makes you valuable. What you choose to become in relationship with this weariness determines whether it remains chronic condition or becomes catalyst for transformation. The choice isn't made once, but repeatedly, in daily moments when fatigue appears and habitual responses activate. Will you automatically push through, collapse into, or numb out from exhaustion, or will you to listen for what this particular tiredness might be trying to tell you? Liberation doesn't promise elimination of all weariness. Human existence inherently involves exertion, challenge, and periods requiring maximum effort. What changes through transformation is your relationship with these realities, moving from unconscious reactivity to conscious response. This shift represents exactly what Jung meant when he wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Your exhaustion feels like fate only while the patterns maintaining it remain unconscious. As awareness illuminates these patterns, genuine choice becomes possible, not choice to eliminate all limitation or transcend humanity, but choice to include these realities consciously in how you live. Not perfect balance. Human existence involves natural fluctuations between different needs and demands, but conscious navigation of these fluctuations rather than unconscious subjugation to them. The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity, Jung observed. The new relationship with weariness we've explored emerges not through intellectual understanding alone, but through genuine play, experimentation with different responses to fatigue, different boundaries around energy expenditure, different measures of what constitutes meaningful living. This play involves risk of disappointing others' expectations, risk of discovering limitations you've denied, risk of questioning identities built around unlimited capability. Yet it offers reward commensurate with this risk, authentic living, aligned with both aspirations and limitations. The transformation of your relationship with weariness ultimately leads to what Jung called the privilege of a lifetime, becoming who you truly are, not who you've been trained to be, not who others need you to be, not who you believe you should be, but who you actually are, including strengths and vulnerabilities, capabilities and limitations, aspirations and needs. This authentic self emerges not through perfection but through honest acknowledgement of your full humanity. Not through becoming superhuman but through embodying your specific humanity more completely. Your weariness has been trying to guide you toward this embodiment. It has been sending warning not to diminish you but to protect the authentic self from demands, expectations, and identities disconnected from your deeper reality. Are you ready to listen? Not just intellectually understand but actually receive what your exhaustion has been trying to tell you. This question brings us full circle, from recognition of warning to liberation through transformation.
The journey continues beyond these words, manifesting in daily choices about how you relate to your fundamental humanity. Will you treat your weariness as weakness to overcome or wisdom to integrate? Will you view limitations as character flaws or natural boundaries to respect? Will you measure your worth by productivity alone or by alignment with authentic values? Will you include your needs in the equation of what matters or continue excluding them? These questions have no single correct answer applicable to all situations. What matters isn't perfection but direction, movement toward greater wholeness, rather than continuing fragmentation. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. What will you choose?